Shutdown Samuel Womack and Mo Alie-Cox are among the two biggest surprises for the Colts here in 2024. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you all for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Hello, everyone. I am Zach Hicks, your favorite film nerd over at horseshoehuddle.com. Jake Arthur, my typical co-host, is not here today because we have our weekly show here with Ben Boris at Colts Film Room. Now, again, we like to do this show talking about Anthony Richardson. Another week without Anthony Richardson. We don't really have too much to say on that. We'll see what happens going forward. If he doesn't start the Miami game, we will devote a whole segment or two to talk about what the heck is going on with this Colts team, but we'll see. It's usually 1 to 2 week injury. It's been 2 weeks. I'm not going to go too crazy over it. Like to see Richardson back out there next week for sure. And again, we don't really want to talk too much about Joe Flacco because it doesn't matter too much. Like quarterback matters, but Joe Flacco, 40-year-old quarterback, doesn't matter much for the future. So we picked a couple of film nerd topics to talk about today. I picked one, Ben picked one, and then we have more of a general one at the very end. So obviously my pick for this episode is the guy that I can't talk enough about, and that is Shutdown Samuel Womack outside at corner. Before I kick it to Ben, because I made Ben watch a lot of his film to really, get up to speed, we both were kind of grinding the Samuel Womack film to get ready for this, and he's been good this year, man. Like, look, not only us film watchers are big on Samuel Womack right now, but the advanced stats are really, really high on him. I mean, you look at Pro Football Focus, he's their fourth highest rated corner in coverage this season. 56% forced incompletion rate, leads all corners in the NFL. 26.8 snaps per reception allowed is 8th among all corners. You go over to Next Gen Stats with NFL Pro. He's only allowing 1.7 yards of average separation, which is among the best among all corners right now. And only a 25% catch rate allowed is the best among all starting corners right now. So, I mean, look, the advanced stats love him. I think just live viewing on Sundays, we love him. And us as film nerds watching him on film, like Samuel Womack, man, like this has gone from like, hey, this kid's making some plays, like good stuff, to like, oh, like this kid can play. Like we're past the point of like get him more snaps. We're at the point now where it's like, oh, this is like a legitimate starter for the Colts.
Yeah, and like kind of going back to it is like, obviously Dallas Flowers has struggled a little bit, but the reason you do make that move is because of the way that Samuel Womack was playing. You don't obviously release a guy like Dallas Flowers if you weren't confident that you have a guy on your roster tomorrow that could step in and play that role. And Samuel Womack's absolutely done that. Like he's making plays that I just don't normally see this defensive back unit make. And I posted one today. And kind of talking, Gus Bradley alluded to this in his presser today. It was like, Samuel is so good at like the other part of playing corner. So you have like obviously your athletic traits, like your speed, your size, arm length, all those kind of things that we look for when we talk about the NFL draft. But like he's making plays that are coming from the film study that he's doing. Because there was this route that I posted, and we had both talked about it, where it's this deep out to Calvin Ridley, and I'm watching it. I'm like, oh, he's kind of sitting on that route. Like, oh, okay, maybe, it's the field side. Like Will Levis is a little banged up. He's not making that throw. I'm just going to play it aggressively. And then I'm like, no, he's kind of like sitting on this vertical the entire way. Like he's pretty flat footed. This must be from film study in some capacity. And so I decided to pull up all the out routes that Calvin Ridley had ran. And sure enough, it's all coming from that same formation. And then you're putting 2 and 2 together. You're like, oh, this is that kind of football play that he's making. And that's really where that separates the good from the great in terms of corners, where, listen, you're playing corner is so hard because you have to react to elite athletes in split second time, because if they get a step on you, it can be over when you're playing some of these really elite receivers. So the way that you try and counteract it is what's happening beforehand so you can run the route for them. Yeah. That's easier said than done because it takes a lot of film study, have to be really smart. But if you can put those two together, you can be a really good corner. And that's how we see it happen. And I think that's what we're seeing with Samuel Womack as a guy who has some of those traits, but then he also has kind of what's going up above the shoulders. And that's really leading to making plays on Sundays.
Yeah. The three traits I told you before we recorded, but the three traits that really come to mind with him is smart, confident, and explosive. He's the smarts to know what route is coming his way. He's confident enough to break on those routes and believe in his smarts. And then he's explosive enough to get there and get, he's had two plays this year. The flat throw to Pickens where he came off of his man and jumped it and knocked it away. And then that play that you just alluded to with Ridley, that if he's there like a half of a second earlier, those are both interceptions. Honestly, the Ridley one probably should have been interception, but Levis just didn't get the ball there. Like Levis's arm kind of died on that throw there. But yeah, we're seeing some really, really good things from him, man. And I say this as someone I have defensive back and offensive line are my positions that I specialize in, I guess, for lack of a better term there. Those are the positions that I really put a microscope on because I feel really confident in how I can evaluate those. And just I feel confident talking about those positions. You guys have seen me over the years. On the Horseshoe Huddle channel, I did that show with Jonathan Hagler, the Into the DB film room, where we talked about the top plays of the week from the Colts DBs. And we talked about Rock Ya-Sin over the years. We talked about, Jalen Jones. I did a preseason video on him last year and how hey, this guy can play a little bit, and it ended up working out pretty well. So I'm not saying this to toot my own horn by any means, but I'm saying this when it comes to DB play in Indy, I really put that under a microscope. And I like to talk about exactly what I'm seeing. And I'm not going to say that Womack has been better than Stephon Gilmore or anything like that, because Gilmore was just a different level of corner here that we haven't really seen under Chris Ballard. But aside from the first half of 2022 from Stephon Gilmore, this might be the best I've seen an outside corner play in Indy in my time covering the team. Again, the level of confidence, the level of understanding his role and what there are plays where he's not being targeted where I'm this kid just knows what he's doing. There was a play action play against, I want to say against Pittsburgh. Against Pittsburgh. They did a play action bootleg and, they're really trying to stress him. They're trying to have him pick the higher or the lower receiver in that. And he plays at perfect depth in between both options. He's sinking on the deep over route until he sees his safety help over the top. And then he comes down low on the underneath route and takes away that option. And Justin Fields is forced to dump it down to the check down. It's plays like that where it's he's in the right position all the time. He's making plays on the ball. And there's a reason why advanced stats and film nerds alike are loving what he's doing. Again, this is not really a joke saying this kid's playing some good football. He's legitimately getting out there and playing some really, really good football.
We're talking about a corner that people would want on their team. It's not just, hey, I'm boosting this player because just to boost the player so that we don't have to complain about the secondary anymore. But he's playing really good football, and he would be a starting corner. I think he was claimed off waivers from Indianapolis, but they also had claims in he was one of the more popular guys that hit waivers. The roster cut down. So there were teams that absolutely wanted him, and you could see he just kind of stepped in, knew the system. I think that's a huge element of this too, coming from San Francisco, where it's very similar in what they're asking your guys to do. And then coming here and playing really good football. I'm excited to see now that there's some receiving gauntlets that the Colts are about to face coming up, and I'm excited to see how he plays because that's going to be the real test. Not to say that any offense in this league. It's hard to play corner no matter who it is because at this point everybody's got a guy that you got to cover for the most part. There's very few teams that just have nobody out there. So, it's going to be really interesting to see how this all plays out. But you can't be anything but happy as an Indianapolis Colts fan for a guy that wasn't really supposed to play, was supposed to be Jalen Jones and Juju Brents, for a guy that's kind of came in and stepped in and earned a starting role. And then not only earned the starting role, is playing good enough football where he's probably playing as well as anybody on that defense right now.
Yeah, one last thing I will say though is we have a lot of comments about Jalen Jones not being like Womack being cornerback one, Jalen Jones, they kind of play very specific roles. They both complement each other really well. I do think Womack's played better this season, but Jalen Jones has had some really peak moments as well. So I'd honestly say the outside cornerback duo of Womack and Jones has been pretty good for the Colts. And dare I say, this is what final thing I'll say before we get out of this segment and go to our next one. But like, if Juju Brents comes back this year, I don't want to take either of these guys off the field. Like
I agree. I think we're getting to the point where it's like, hey, like this, we might have something here. Like now there's a lot of football left to be played, but we might have something here just from what we're seeing and the kind of the guys that, or some of the plays that they're making.
Yeah. So we'll have to see. Obviously, like you mentioned, big gauntlet coming up of good quarterbacks, good receivers, and we'll see if that sustains throughout the
rest only
of the
got
year.
better today, by the way. So.
Yeah, right. Only got worse for the Colts. So we'll see if that sustains. But as of right now, man, I'm feeling pretty good about Samuel Womack. Like I think the Colts have something right here. But enough about my favorite guy. We're going to talk about Ben's pick of the week for what he wants to talk about. And of course, he picked the SEO golden child, that is Mo Alie-Cox. So we're going to talk about Mo Alie-Cox in the return of the Y tight end here in Indy coming up in just a second. But first, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. As of right now, FanDuel has the Colts as 3.5-point favorites this week against the Miami Dolphins with a 43.5 over-under. Again, a lot of that will change with us seeing who's going to be the quarterback for the Colts, who's going to be the running back for the Colts, who's going to be the quarterback for the Dolphins. Like, a lot of that will change, obviously, this week. But keep your eye over there on FanDuel. Again, that's FanDuel.com. And also, you guys can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks is the best way to get in on the action on sports in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy, which is great for the Colts because we've had quite a few injuries this year. So lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, Prize Picks keeps your lineup live. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money on sports action. Join over 10 million users and sign up today. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus guaranteed. Prize Picks is the best way to get real money this football season. Which players are going off? Which players aren't? Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. Alrighty, Colts fans, we are back with Ben Boris at Colts Film Room talking our film nerd episode here. Again, we can't really go into Anthony Richardson because Richardson missed another game this week. So Ben's topic that he really wanted to touch on this week was tight end, which is kind of a crazy topic right now, Ben, because if anyone's going to have a complaint about the Colts offense this year, it's about tight ends because we're not getting a ton of receiving production. Like, the young players that we all expected to have roles really haven't had any this year. No Jelani Woods, Granson taking a step back, Will Mallory not seeing too much of the field. But here comes veteran Mo Alie-Cox, former basketball player. If you guys didn't know that, Mo Alie-Cox, former basketball player at VCU. He's the 4th highest graded tight end in the NFL by Pro Football Focus, 4th highest graded tight end in run blocking by Pro Football Focus this year. And what we've seen in recent weeks, especially with Joe Flacco getting the last 2 starts, the Colts have really been increasing his snaps. Mo Alie-Cox is getting more playing time. He's producing in that playing time. He's catching the ball a little bit more with Flacco. So, Ben, tell me all about Mo Alie-Cox and the return of the Y tight end here in the Colts offense.
Yeah, I think that we're seeing a shift league-wide in some of these tight ends, and I think it's really evident in Indianapolis because I mean, we all know that the NFL is cyclical, right? Where like, this all kind of started in the week 2, scoring's down, too high shells, all this kind of stuff. And I think that we're kind of seeing similarly with how things are going with the tight ends, where like we've seen, some of these really what I would call the F tight ends or the move tight ends, where they're going to be receiving threats and they're going to take advantage of these linebackers and safeties and all these kind of things and generate explosive plays. And now we're getting kind of to the pendulum swinging where defenses are like, hey, some of these guys are just another receiver on the field. You're playing 10 personnel when you're really in 11 personnel. And when you have 2 tight ends on the field and you're in 12 personnel, that's really 11 personnel because that guy is just a big receiver. And now, because there's no legitimate threat, we're seeing, you can go look at the week 1 game, the first game to kick off the year, which was the Chiefs and the Ravens. And we kind of saw it with Mark Andrews, where like Mark Andrews wasn't really blocking that well. And they basically had a check to go to nickel the 12 personnel. So like we're seeing defenses just adjust to this kind of stuff because they know who they would rather get lighter bodies on the field to cover the guy that, hey, we know he's not going to create an extra gap, and if he creates the extra, well, by math he will, but like not by anything that he can do in the run game. We expect our linebackers to dominate that matchup. That's a schematic advantage. I think that's kind of what we're seeing with Kylen Granson, where, I would describe Kylen as a guy who's a finesse blocker, where, he can get in front of a guy. He can, maybe block a guy in space. But if we're going to run downhill, we want the guys with Mo Alie-Cox and Drew Ogletree. And that's a lot of the reason that they are playing really good football that you're never seeing on a stat sheet. I think everyone wants the guy like a Dalton Kincaid or a Sam Laporta or Travis Kelce. And you could really make a serious argument, because I've seen it been made, and there's merit to it, that Travis Kelce, who's one of the best receiving tight ends of all time, creates similar production to a pretty average wide receiver. And like, if you don't have that guy that can also provide a plus element in the run game, then you're kind of losing out on that extra guy. So I think one of the things that's made Drew Ogletree and Mo Alie-Cox so valuable is when they're on the field, like, hey, Mo Alie-Cox isn't going to outrun anyone. When it comes to, maybe his speed, I think that's pretty, I've heard the comments there. That's not his game, but he can make some of these competitive catches over the middle. He's got really strong hands. I think he's a plus in the red zone that we kind of saw in the Jacksonville game, and I think we're going to continue to see that throughout the year. He's kind of been a guy that, people want off this team, and I'm not really sure why. Even dating back to 2023, he was on the field for every high leverage situation and oftentimes got the ball in a lot of those. Whether it's the pop pass in Houston, it's the red zone touchdown, or it's the 4th down fake power with Zaire Franklin. So like, this is a guy that has been doing it for a while, is never going to really dominate the stat sheet per se, but he's creating advantages for this offense that we're going to see pay dividends.
Yeah, and I will say, Jake and I had a whole episode this past offseason where we did talk about how it was time to move on from Mo Alie-Cox, more so because, and again, this was before Jelani Woods got injured again, it was more so about the youth movement. Bring the 4 young kids out here, see what you can do with them, because it's about the youth movement.
Contract year for Mo Alie-Cox as well.
Yeah,
so
right. So that was more, but as the offseason went on, and especially as Jelani Woods was underwhelming at times, and then obviously the injury happened, it kind of got to the point to me where it's like, there's nobody else on this roster that can block besides Drew Ogletree. Like Will Mallory, he's not going to go out there and block defensive ends.
And we're seeing more 12 personnel. They would rather have those guys on the field at this point.
Right. Like Kylen Granson's not going to block defensive ends. I mean, Jelani was showing some good things.
I'm not sure he has a singular. I'm not sure that Kylen Granson has a singular rep inside the 10. So like, yeah. I'm not. Someone can quote me on that, but like, yeah, I think it's less about maybe the player Mo Alie-Cox and the archetype of player, where like this is why you will hear me shout for Tyler Warren to Indianapolis, based off the fact of like, hey, let's get an inline wide tight end. Those are back in this league. If you have a guy where he can go and block an edge rusher if he needs to, he can block a linebacker, or that edge player in the run game. He can, also catch the ball and be a physical point. Like, if you can have the balance of that too, that's what makes tight ends dangerous. Not having these, glorified big receivers, which obviously are merit and they're going to put up stats like a receiver, and they'll put up stats on your fantasy team. But like when it comes to what's winning in the NFL right now, there's a reason that Sam Laporta had just a ginormous rookie year, and he's probably matching that again.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big part of this Colts offense too, especially when you don't have the creativity in the run game with Richardson missing and Taylor missing. The Colts had to lean on kind of more of a generic run game with Joe Flacco. And with that more generic run game came more 12 personnel, more 11 personnel, but with a heavier tight end out there. So you could have the 6 blockers on the offensive line. And credit to Mo Alie-Cox for being a very good blocker this season and for being a very good blocker his entire career. Again, like, as the offseason kind of went on and I moved past the phase of the youth movement only at tight end, I wrote an article right before the season started where it's like, look, Mo Alie-Cox has made himself invaluable because he does that one thing that coaches value, and that is blocking. And like you mentioned, the high leverage and being dependable, but look, it's the blocking, man. Like
it is, and it always will be for the.
Yeah.
I mean, like, don't get it twisted. Like he might be getting up there in age. People want to talk about the contract, which isn't even really that large. When you think about how, like, I just think we're seeing a kind of an overall league-wide switch where these big. If you're a guy that can block and you can go out there and be even a remotely average pass catcher, you're going to be a really good player in the league because teams don't see, hey, Kylan Granson's on the line of scrimmage right now. They're not running this ball. Like, You know what I mean? Like the teams believe that. And even a guy like Kylan Granson, there's more extremes out there in the league where there's guys like Mike Gesicki is a wide receiver. Like, yes. And I say that as someone who really thinks Mike Gesicki's a good player. It's like, he's not a guy that's 10 personnel. Like, so I just think that's what we're seeing in this league at this point.
Yeah. And guys, because we talked about Mo Alie-Cox and blocking for tight ends, we do have to talk about this Colts run game. The Colts run game, one of the best run games in football to start the season. Last couple of weeks, especially with Joe Flacco being at quarterback, it's been a struggle at the running game. So we'll talk about exactly where the issues have been in the Colts run game, what kind of is to point to and blame, and can the Colts right the ship when it comes to their rushing offense the rest of the season. But first, guys, you all know me. I love me a good concert. I go to concerts all the time, especially my punk shows, my metal shows that come near me in the DC, Baltimore area. So there's a lot of really cool venues up there. And anytime I want to get a ticket to my new favorite band or one of my old favorite bands even, I go to Game Time. Game Time makes curation, and it has curation that makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and everything near you. You get some really cool features with Game Time, including all-in pricing, which is toggling. You can toggle that feature and get your total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You get your seat view, so a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. You get the lowest price guarantee as well, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference, and you get the Game Time ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry because Game Time understands that life happens and sometimes you can't make it to your favorite event. They got that ticket coverage for you. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, that is create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, guys, we are back. Locked On Colts Everydayers. I'm talking with Ben Boris at Colts Film Room. We're discussing all film nerdy things here. Now, we talked about two topics that we really wanted to hit on, which is you talking about tight ends and Mo Alie-Cox, me talking about my boy Samuel Womack. Now we got to talk about a pressing issue with the Colts, and that is the evaporation of this run game the last couple weeks. Now, a lot of factors go into this. I think the biggest factors are they lost not only Anthony Richardson, but they also lost Jonathan Taylor at the exact same time. And those were the two most important factors, obviously, in the running game.
Factor in Ryan Kelly and Will Fries as well.
Yeah, Ryan Kelly and Will Fries as well. Like they've lost a lot of important pieces to their running game. But what we've seen from this rushing attack the last 2 weeks has simply not been good enough. Like, regardless of who is injured in front of you, the Tennessee Titans have a good defensive front, and they really attack downhill at a really high level. But again, having under 4 yards of carry from your main back and really your explosive running game just going away. I mean, their only explosive runs the last couple weeks have been, an early run to Trey Sermon in this past game, the Tyler Goodson 33-yard run, which is great, and then the Joe Flacco scramble for 21 yards. That has been your most explosive running element these last 2 weeks. And that's just not sustainable, obviously. That's not something you can really rely on. So, Ben, when you're watching the film of this Colts rushing attack these last couple weeks, is it really so much like, look, Jonathan Taylor's that much better than Trey Sermon, the offensive line underperforming, Anthony Richardson's impact? Like, what are you really looking at here when you're looking at the Colts' struggles on the ground game the last couple weeks?
Yeah, and before we recorded, I kind of told you, like, it's going to be way more than just one thing. I don't think we can peg, this goes all on confounding variable X or Z. Obviously, when you run a lot of inside zone as a team and you lose your center, your right guard, your running back, and your +1 quarterback, it's hard to run the football. Right. That's also an excuse. I think I don't want to be too critical because I think Shane Steichen and the staff, when they've had Anthony Richardson, have found a way to generate explosives with really good creative run design. I don't think it's necessarily been the best these past 2 weeks. A lot of base runs, a lot of, the same eye candy motion where they run Josh Downs in the orbit return. And, they haven't done anything off it outside of maybe an RPO where like linebackers really aren't going to buy that. I mean, they get the man zone tell, but it doesn't really they're going to need some more creativity in the run game, whether it's under center with Joe Flacco. They're kind of doing it from the pistol, which they do for Anthony Richardson. And the reason you would want Anthony Richardson in the pistol is because, you still get the element of the +1 quarterback when you're under center. Now we're just worrying about the running back. We know the quarterback's not going to run the ball. With Joe Flacco, some under center runs aren't going to help because nobody believes he's running the ball. So that's kind of, maybe my critique in the moment. I also know that they've probably been juggling some injury things and that can affect the game plan in a lot of different ways. Still all excuses. I think Tyler Goodson ran the ball really well, I think, in that game. He gave them some juice where I think, Tyler Goodson and Trey Sermon are the yin and the yang in terms of opposite play styles. Tyler Goodson cannot pass protect. Trey Sermon's really, really good at pass protecting. Tyler Goodson runs the ball fast. He's explosive and he has speed and he has juice. Trey Sermon doesn't necessarily do that, but he can turn out he's big enough to turn out some of those dirty yards where we can run the ball downhill and I can push the pile forward. And it just kind of felt like, they didn't really have a plan for either of them. So that's going to have to change. And I think they know that's going to have to change. So I think there'll be some more creativity heading forward to get some of those lanes open. I think the other confounding variable here is that they've played some pretty good defensive lines. Putting in Meatloaf, who I will continue to call Meatloaf, Devondre Sweat and Justin Simmons in the interior is not easy. It is not easy to control the run versus the Tennessee Titans. I wouldn't say that Jacksonville necessarily has those caliber of guys, but they definitely don't have nobodies out there either. So, I think that it's going to be a work in progress, but hopefully we shouldn't have to worry about this because Anthony Richardson will change that dynamic. And then as soon as you could hopefully get Jonathan Taylor back, you should feel the same. And I think you feel hopeful about both those guys just from the pure element of if Jonathan Taylor wasn't going to play or had no shot at playing, he probably would have been put on IR.
Right.
Someone would have to check with me if they've used all their IR spots, but I don't think they have, despite how injured they've been. So he would probably have gone on IR. It will be interesting to see. Will be interesting. I think they do definitely need to find ways to get the ball in Tyler Goodson's hands. I mean, he just seems to make plays. So
yeah,
that's kind of my overall thoughts. It's certainly concerning. It certainly held them behind the sticks multiple times last Sunday. It's definitely got to change. I think you're going to play a different front that you have played, like style of front in terms of like how they align guys, and then also body types too. So we should be able to see some significant improvement in that area, but worst comes to worst and you have to see a combination of Trey Sermon and Joe Flacco again, you would hope for something way better than what we've seen.
Yeah, and one thing I want to ask you, one more thing before we get out of here when it comes to this running game, because I'll give my quick thoughts as well. I'm with you. I think Stain Steichen is very simplistic when it comes to the running game. Like they don't do a lot of crazy things in the run game. Like they live an inside zone and split zone. They do a lot of that stuff.
They do with Anthony Richardson.
Right.
But when
Yeah.
Gardner Minshew was in the game, it was very rare to see, kind of nuanced design. They had some things. I want to give them some sort of credit, but they stick to their base runs because the run is just a tool to keep them ahead of the sticks.
Right. And yeah, with Richardson, they do mix in a lot of interesting QB stuff. But even for the most part, like they still like the inside zone in the split zone. They just build off of it a little bit more with Richardson, and that's what keeps it interesting and keeps it going. But it is a fairly simplistic overall running scheme. But it works because of the players in the scheme. It's kind of players over scheme. Like what's the Jims and Joes over X's and O's or whatever is what people say. So yeah, it's kind of like that when it came to how the Colts use their running game. And one thing I want to ask you before we get out of here, though, is let's say they don't get Jonathan Taylor back this week. Because again, the ankle injury, we could see, hopefully he's feeling better and he's able to go. But they do get back Richardson, even though it might be a little bit more cautious with Richardson. Do you think just having Richardson back, just the impact of him being on the football field can maybe clear some things? I mean, because like Tyler Goodson, for instance, is not really like this passive runner where he needs to like be patient and wait for a hole. He is the guy where the second that ball touches his hands, he's going 100 miles per hour straight. And if there's a lane there, he'll hit it, like the 33-yard run, like he'll hit it. So just having Richardson back, do you think that could like lead to bigger holes for these guys to create a little bit more?
So the short answer is depending on how limited they are. The longer answer becomes yes, because I think they'll lean back into RPOs, which they have not done this year, which has been a real development where like they were such a heavy RPO offense. And obviously the RPO makes it so when you do run the ball, you're going to run it into a light box because the read takes you that way.
Right.
Joe Flacco has tried to do it. He's been pretty bad at it, if we're being honest. Some of these runs where Trey Sermon is simply bottled up at the point of attack is because Joe Flacco made the wrong read on the play. That happened a couple times in Tennessee where they had a perimeter screen that had the numbers with Josh Downs. They usually tag a bubble onto an inside zone, and that's how they do it. They had the numbers to run that play. It should have been thrown. I think Joe would probably tell you that as well, unless it's just there for eye candy and not a part of the play, but I doubt it. Anthony Richardson gives you the capacity to do that. So, because that's where he kind of really excels in a lot of he's really good. He's a really good RPO quarterback. So, yes, you would like to see him get at least a couple. You always want that in the back of your mind, I think. I don't think you need to run him as much as you have been if you're in the interest of being cautious. But like, the occasional run, kind of like we see with kind of Jalen Hurts in 2024, where you'll see with even a little more towards Lamar, but Lamar will run it a good bit just to keep the defense on their toes so they can't just dive right at the running back, and you get the element of the math. I think you need to run him at least a couple times a game. I don't think it needs to be as excessive as it has, but I think that's also part of the reason you hold him out the extra week is so that you can do the things that this team excels at and getting him healthy that way.
Yeah, for sure. So overall, when it comes to Colts run game, some concern right now, but they are missing arguably their four most important. I mean, Quentin
Nelson. If you're going to run inside zone, losing a guard, a center, your quarterback, and your running back, that's going to be tough. So
yeah. No matter how well Bordellini has played, no matter how well Flacco has played, how well Dalton Tucker has played, like Trey Sermon and Tyler Goodson haven't been terrible this year by any means. So like, no matter how well those guys are playing, those guys being out there rather than Richardson, Taylor, Kelly, and Will Fries, it's huge, especially with how Fries was playing this year and how Taylor was playing. Like it's a really big difference. So not terribly concerned with the Colts run game. Maybe they won't finish top 5 like I expected before the season in terms of rushing impact, but I think the run game will be fine long term as long as they get Taylor and Richardson back. But that's all we have for today, guys. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Colts your first listen today. Now for your second listen, go find the new Locked On NFL with 2 shows every day. First, the Madman Tyler Rowland kicks off your morning with a double shot of NFL espresso, and then stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. If you guys don't already, Make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, at Zach Hicks 2, and at Colts Film Room, all on Twitter. Also, subscribe to us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We love your guys' ratings and views, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow afternoon.